happy, I had to think for a second, Thursday, I think. I had a video shoot in here this week, and that becomes a sort of a mishmash of days. It's a little bit frenetic. It's a little bit busy. There's a lot of stuff going on. So one, in the world of being self-employed, which I've been for, I don't know, 30 years now, I easily lose track of days. Two, when there's a video shoot and I'm just eyeballs deep in making sure the content is there and good and stuff, then I really lose track of days. So anyway, that's a long, circuitous conversation too. Yes, I'm pretty sure it really is Thursday, at least, here in Wisconsin. So we are, I'm checking questions here. Couple things. One, summer is right around the corner. A week ago this time, I was talking about, don't you want to be the hero when you go to the barbecue and bring a homemade bottle opener? Yes. Two, look at the page today and you can grab these Adirondack chair plans. Really the number one comment I get from people about this Adirondack chair project is, this is the most comfortable chair I have ever sat in, or at least the most comfortable Adirondack chair. What's cool about it is that unlike a lot of plans, the seat has a curve in it and the back has a curve in it. So often it's no curves, and like sitting there or standing there looking at the chair, it doesn't seem like a big deal. But really, I think an Adirondack chair with those big wide arms is the exact kind of chair that you want to get back in, have a beverage of your choice on the big wide arm, and maybe fall asleep. And with a straight seat and a dead straight back, maybe not going to happen. So with this, with its multiple curves, it's an incredibly comfortable Adirondack chair. So point out of that, grab the plans. Another thing I'll say about that I think is a big positive is when I put that together, the weird shapes, the arm, the legs, all of that is in a full-size template. So you don't have to take this tiny scale drawing and figure out how to make the parts this big. You just take what we have given you to Kinko's or someplace like that, have them printed on a large scale, and you've got all of the parts full size. So it makes it a lot easier to get those curvy parts into a template so you can cut them and make the chair. So anyway, Adirondack chair for summer, wonderful thing. Today, what we're looking to talk about is sheet stock. That's that pile that I have there. And this is a thing I talk about in my woodworking classes all the time. And it occurred to me we should do it here because I know from doing this live with people, live, not live streaming, but with people in my shop or when I teach in somebody else's shop, that there are a lot of questions about sheet stock. And there's a lot of stuff in the marketplace that if you're buying all of your material at a home center, you may not be aware of some of this stuff. And in order to have a full library of material available for your projects, you should have a full arsenal of information in your head about sheet stocks that are available. So that's the drive for this. Couple questions here already. Bill says, please offer tips for putting rabbits and dados in melamine without ruining the end of the cut. So I'm not sure what that means, ruining the end of the cut. I have routinely, if you're not familiar with melamine, we're going to look at it in a minute. It's end of the day, it's particle board with a plasticized surface. I have very routinely cut dados and rabbits in it with a dado blade, a stacked dado blade and a table saw, or with a router bit, and not had any problems. If ruining the end of the cut means it's blowing out as you exit, if you're using a router bit or a dado head, then that's kind of standard working procedure would be to support that cut on the exit side. So as the cutter exits, there's something there to support it and it can't blow out on you. So that would be my approach to that. If that's the issue, is that on the exit side of the cut, that's what you mean by ruining the cut, I would get some support behind that to prevent that from happening. Then, not familiar with MDO. Can you talk about it a little deeper? Yeah, so it's in the pile here. It'll get the treatment, the sheet stock treatment. Gregory says, what's your experience with pre-finished plywood? How are they usually finished? How repairable if the surface is damaged? So this is a good question. There are places where not just plywood, you can get sheet goods that have finish on them when you leave the place. You're buying it pre-finished. I just cut a piece yesterday. If I can think of where there's a scrap of it, I'll run and get it. But what do they usually use? Well, part of the benefit to this is they're sealing this stuff in some big industrial environment, which means they can probably use a finish that's maybe a little bit more robust than what you would use in your shop, because they've got a way to evacuate the fumes. They've got a spray booth. They've got great equipment. They've got blah, 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 blah. So one of the benefits to it is you may get a better finish on that stuff than what you could apply on your own. I've worked with a bunch of this stuff a long time ago. I was a production manager in a commercial cabinet shop. I've told this story a couple times. And from that shop, we built all the Banana Republic stores in the country and half the Old Navy stores in the country. We consumed a lot of sheet goods and a lot of solid wood. The Old Navy stores, the mandate for that was they were made from wheat board. I'll talk about that if I remember when we get in that category, but it was pre-finished. So that had all been pre-finished with a catalyzed lacquer. I'm not ready to say every pre-finished material out there has been finished with catalyzed lacquer. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. You could go to the manufacturer and ask them to get more details. One of the things that's a little potentially funky is that when we work with this and I bring it to my shop and I cut dados and I cut rabbets and I do adjustable shelf holes, you have to be a little bit careful in that if I scratch the heck out of it, I've got to repair that scratch. Now I've found, for the most part, the finish is pretty robust. And if I'm at least a little bit careful, I'm going to be okay. Like, it takes a pretty significant whoops to put a scratch in there. But again, you're going to want to know from the manufacturer, if the finish is X, what do I use in my shop? Can I go back and with a rattle can of lacquer, if I scuff a scratch, can I hit it with a rattle can of lacquer and it'll be seamless? Or is the finish that's on there not going to be compatible with the lacquer that I would, the rattle can of lacquer in my shop? So you need to find out from the manufacturer how to get your repair finish to play nice with what's already on there. Like I said, in my case, with all that wheat board, it was pre-finished with catalyzed lacquer. We routinely sprayed catalyzed lacquer. So in cases where now I've got a raw edge that shows, or I need to do a repair, we could touch that up with the same product that we had in the shop. So that worked out. So my overall experience with it is good. And you're saving a big step because the inside faces of your project are already done when you put it together. If you have glue squeeze out, it's very easy to clean up because you can wipe that with a wet rag off that finished surface. So there are some advantages to it. Okay. Timothy says, a couple months ago, I asked about sandy ply. A little research says it's a tree growing from Ecuador to Colombia. I picked up a few 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch project panels from a big box store. So I think this is just an awareness thing that it's another product that's in the marketplace. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff today that goes way beyond North American hardwoods. And with material being imported all the time, there's a pretty wide array of materials available. So let's hit a couple things before I talk about specific sheet goods. One would be, why do we do this? Why do we buy sheet goods? And there are a couple reasons for this. One is economy, and there are at least two economies. So one is economy to your checkbook. If I use red oak as a baseline, generally the price per board foot, which is about a square foot, 1 inch thick, which is a square foot, 1 inch thick, the price per board foot of solid red oak compared to a square foot of plywood or any kind of sheet stock, that sheet stock is about half as much. So that's a direct dollar economy. The other economy is economy of movement. If I need a base cabinet side is typically 23¼ inches wide. If I need a 23¼ inch wide piece in solid wood, I'm gluing a bunch of 4 to 6 inch wide pieces together. So I'm jointing them, gluing them, flattening the panel. Then I'm finally ready to work with that panel. With sheet goods, we just cut that from a 4x8 sheet and we're ready to go. The other big reason is expansion and contraction. When we go from the most dry times of winter to the most humid times of summer, we see big seasonal movement in solid wood. Again, using red oak as an example, a 24-inch wide piece of red oak, the width of a base cabinet, could, from the dry times of winter to the humid times of summer, move 1/4 inch, expand and contract 1/4 inch. There's no stopping that. So you can have it sealed 6 sides, you can do whatever you're going to do, it's still going to move seasonally. If you accommodate that movement, you're going to be fine, but you've got to take steps to accommodate that movement. Clearly, 200 years ago, sheet goods weren't available, and lots of cabinets, lots of furniture, lots of dining room tables were built that used large pieces of wood, and they accommodated wood movement. So it can be done. But if we don't have to do it, that's cool. So economy of price, economy of movement in your shop, easily getting large pieces out of a piece of plywood. And then 2, seasonal movement. We can effectively say sheet goods don't expand and contract at all. Realistically, they move a tiny, 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 tiny bit. The number is so small, it's not a big deal. So with that, we don't have to worry about accommodating that seasonal movement. So a bunch of good reasons to buy sheet goods. We're going to start with plywood because plywood is really common. Plywood is very much what the name sounds like. It's made up of plies. And part of what makes plywood stable is that the face grain on that veneer is going this way. Then in the first layer, the grain alternates direction. In the next layer, it alternates correct direction. Alternates. So each layer in a sheet of plywood is opposing, the grain is opposing the grain direction of the other layer. That's where its stability comes from. One of the things that's really important to understand with all the sheet goods we're going to talk about, when we talk about veneered sheet goods, this is red oak. That veneer is about a 1/24 of an inch thick. It's very, very thin. The material below is not the same as the face material. In this case, it's fir. Poplar is another popular choice. The problem out of that is if you do something where you scratch through or sand through that face veneer, looking at this. So then, plywood, made up of plies, and again, in this case, it's red oak, 2 sides. It's red oak, both faces. As I talk about this stuff, one of the things that I would like you to do is expand where you get your wood from. If you're currently going to a home center and you're buying everything there, broaden your horizons a little bit. And what I mean by that is we've got a video on WWGOA about searching out hardwood suppliers, not a lumberyard, not a home center, for stuff like sheet goods, your solid wood. And you're going to find that in the sheet stock that we're talking about today, there's a much larger array of stuff available from a hardwood supplier than there is from a home center. Home centers here in Western Wisconsin, Home Depot and Menards, they commonly have red oak plywood and birch veneer plywood, and that's it. If you go to a hardwood supplier, you're going to be able to get walnut, maple, plywood, southern yellow pine, maybe curly maple, a huge array of stuff. So it's really going to broaden the scope of what you can get to make your projects out. So with plywood, what we've got are those alternating plies inside here. One of the deals with plywood is it's allowed by the APA, American Plywood Association, to be slightly undersized. Theoretically, 1/32 undersized. So when we call this 3/4 inch thick, it's 23/32. Same is going to be true with 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch. They're going to be thinner than what they are called. Not a big deal as long as you're aware of it. When we cut potatoes and rabbits, when we do joinery, we want to accommodate that size. So you just need to be aware that it's going to be a little bit undersized when we work with it. And I just keep throwing out this 4x8 thing as though everybody's aware of that. In case you're not, sheet goods in the plywood family commonly come in 4 foot wide, 8 foot long sheets. So cabinet grade plywood. In grading, one of the things that's noteworthy is that A, B, C, D are our grades. A is the best, D is the worst. I pretty commonly buy what's called B2. That means it's B, B, it's B both sides. And that gives me the quality of face that I need. I don't know that ever in my career I have bought A grade plywood. If you look at, Max, if you throw up in the chat roll our guide to buying wood, one of the things that we included with that is an extensive section on plywood grades. So I'm not going to spend a bunch of time talking about that because we've already covered it there. Grab that PDF and you can read all about the plywood grades that were, as it was described in that PDF. Now, also in the world of plywood, this is more of a construction grade plywood. This can come from a home center or a lumberyard. This is BC. Let me zoom you in on this because it's got some stuff going that's noteworthy. With BC plywood, one of the things that's interesting is really, in most cases, the plies become the face veneer. So what I mean by that is the face veneer is very, very thick, unlike the cabinet grade stuff that we looked at earlier. So part of the benefit to this is that if you use it and you get in a scenario where you have to do a lot of sanding to clean it up, there's really not much danger of going through that nearly 1/8 inch thick layer of face veneer because it's pretty thick. Where do I use that? If I took you on a shop tour, I'm just standing here looking around. That cabinet behind me, that's actually birch plywood. See the one in the back corner there? That's made out of 3/4 inch BC construction grade plywood. The doors there are also plywood banded with pine. So BC plywood, I have got a lot of stuff in my shop that was made from this. And like in the case of that cabinet, the face frame and the drawer fronts are #2 pine from a home center. It's inexpensive. It's easy to get because I can walk into a home center and buy it. When you're working on stuff for your shop, that BC is a nice consideration because it's inexpensive, easy to get to. If you make a mistake and you got to go get another sheet, it's nowhere near the cost of this cabinet grade stuff I'm talking about. So it's a great material I love it for shop cabinets. I've probably got 8 cabinets in this building that were made in that style. BC plywood for the case and construction grade #2 pine for drawer fronts and face frames. I wouldn't want to make my kitchen out of this, but for shop cabinets, it works out great. One of the qualifiers is that with plywood, compared to other stuff we're going to talk about, plywood does have a tendency to bow, a greater tendency than other sheet goods. So it's not uncommon if I go to a home center, I'm the schmuck who's taking a bunch of bent stuff off the top of the stack putting it on the adjacent stack until I get down to straight pieces. And then I come back to my shop with those straight pieces. So be prepared for the idea that you might have to do a little bit of sorting of the pile to get some stuff that's relatively flat so that you're not fighting a bunch of bows in material. But it's there. If you dig through the pile a little bit, it's there. But you got to do it. It's a good upper body workout. You know, you're moving a bunch of, 50-pound sheets. Let me look for questions quickly. Andy asks about financial aspect of this. We're going to talk about that. Max put the link in there for that guide, that ultimate guide to wood. Grab that. You know, there's a bunch of information in there about hardwood grading and all sorts of other stuff. Gary Coyne did an amazing job on producing that guide. Also, lumber or plywood, sheet stock grading is also included in that. And that's going to give you what you need to know to be a better plywood shop. Dennis says, can you give us do's and don'ts on using pocket holes on sheet goods? I don't know if I have any do's and don'ts. Like, I've pocket holed some plywood stuff, sheet good stuff together. I would say the biggest thing is screw selection. You want coarse thread screws for sheet goods, just like you would use coarse thread pocket screws for softwood. Other than that, off the top of my head, it gets pretty much the same treatment as anything else I'm going to do pocket holes in. Now, still in the plywood family, and we have this stuff. Technically, this is called multi-ply plywood. And this is like calling all fascia tissue Kleenex, all things you put on the cut on your finger a Band-Aid. This isn't necessarily Baltic birch plywood. It's multi-ply plywood. It may be Baltic birch. So multi-ply, just like the name says, look at how many plies are in that edge, 1/2 inch thick, compared to how many plies are in this. So with multi-ply, we get a few things. That is a very stable material. The face veneer, which is birch, is thicker than what you're going to see on a cabinet grade veneer. This is not a 1/24 of an inch thick. It's quite a bit thicker. I've actually sent this stuff through my surface sander, my Supermax, in cases where I needed to clean it up. And it's very doable. It's very doable because you got enough here to work. A few things about it. One promise with Baltic birch, with multi-ply, is there are never internal voids. So when I cut into it and I'm exposing an edge, I'm never going to have a pocket here that's a pocket. I'm never exposing a void. That is not a promise I necessarily have on the other plywoods. There are different grades of this, just like the grades we talked about with cabinet grade, but the grading is different. Read the guide. This works with B, double B, triple B, and it has to do with, this one doesn't have any. When if there's a knot in this and it's been patched, that affects the grading. Is it patched one face? Is it patched two faces? So again, read Gary's guide and you'll get that information. So where does multi-ply fit in? It's per square foot. It's pretty safe to say it's the most expensive of the plywoods I've talked about so far. I would not buy this to build a room full of cabinets. I wouldn't buy this to build shop cabinets. I would buy this to build jigs. I routinely buy it to make drawer boxes. That's why I have this 1/2 inch here. Probably every drawer box I've made in the last 10 years has been made from multi-ply plywood. When I do that, I don't band the edge. It's hard to see in the glare of the light. But when you sand that multi-ply edge and put a coat of finish on it, it looks pretty cool. And then very commonly, I do a lock rabbet joint on the corners, and the intersection of the joint looks cool under finish. So it actually adds an aesthetic to the drawer that I don't otherwise have. Number one application for me is drawers. Another application is if I'm building jigs for my shop, there's a great likelihood there'll be Baltic birch or another product we're about to talk about. So multi-ply, Baltic birch. The Baltic birch is the imported form of this. The domestic version is apple ply. One of the things that's funky, a couple things funky about the imported version, when I call this 1/2 inch, it's not, it's 12 millimeters. That's not quite 1/2 inch, that's a little undersized. When I get a sheet of 3/4 inch Baltic birch, it's not, it's 19 millimeters. So again, not a big deal, but when you're doing joinery, you need to be aware of that so that you're accommodating that. Additionally, Baltic birch, the imported stuff, comes in 5-foot sheets, 5 foot by 5 foot. Apple ply, the domestic stuff, comes in 4x8s. So when you you find your hardwood supplier, you give them a call, you could ask, do you have multi-ply? Do you have Baltic? Do you have apple ply? What do you sell? How much is it? Blah, 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 blah. So it's just good in the awareness category that there's stuff out there besides the imported stuff. Now let's go back to veneered material. And we have this stuff. This is a cherry veneer, both faces, but that's cherry veneer on MDF. MDF stands for medium density fiberboard. So this would be the equivalent of the oak we already looked at. We can get oak veneered MDF, we can get cherry veneered plywood. These are interchangeable. With MDF, there are a couple things going on. One of the promises with MDF is that it does run a more consistent thickness. When we call that stuff 3/4 of an inch, it runs a very true 3/4 of an inch until it's exposed to moisture. And that moisture doesn't have to be, I get it wet. Moisture can just be ambient humidity. If it soaks up ambient humidity, it's going to swell a little bit. But a fresh sheet of MDF, you bring it into your shop, you cut a 3/4 inch dado, it's probably going to drop right in there. Do a test cut first, but it runs very consistently. It also tends to stay really, really flat. Again, comparatively to plywood, this family of products, we're going to talk about the family aspect in a second. This family of products tends to lay much flatter. If we took the same face veneer, cherry veneered MDF, cherry veneered plywood, the MDF will generally be about 60% the price, less expensive compared to the plywood. So that goes back to the question that was asked earlier regarding cost. Plywood products are always going to be, plywood veneered products are always going to be more expensive than MDF veneered products in the same species. For me, a big reason I avoid MDF if I can, it's stupid heavy. It's 80 or 90 pounds a sheet. I'm a one-man shop, so I'm carrying this stuff in and out by myself all the time. I'd rather not fight that fight. Plywood is quite a bit less heavy, makes it easier to manage. But it's got some advantages. It's got the price point. So if I'm doing work for somebody else and I need a really competitive price, I might do MDF instead of plywood if I need to get my material cost down. If I'm going to paint a project, I might choose MDF because I can get it raw. And MDF paints like a dream. I built a whole office suite of cabinets out of MDF because the final product was all going to be painted. And I mean the whole office suite, that was cases, face frames, door rails and stiles, raised panels, drawer fronts, everything was MDF. Because it's glue that holds all those fibers together, it's abrasive on your cutting tools. So I raised, I don't know how many raised panels, a dozen raised panels. And after this job, my panel raiser had to be sharpened because that MDF was very abrasive against my carbide. But inexpensive, and it paints like a dream because that surface is so smooth and flat. There's no grain to telegraph through. So it's a great product if you're going to do paint grade. Now I said family. So MDF, both of these, the raw and the veneer, and this stuff and the stuff I'm about to talk about all fall into the particle board family. And the difference is that particle fiber. So this stuff, particle board, when you look at it, these are maybe the chips, the size of the chips coming off your jointer. And they glue them together and they make a sheet. This stuff is more like MDF, is more like the dust that comes off of your off a sander, mixed with glue, made into a sheet. So a much finer particle in this. With either of these, be aware that they're very dusty to work with. MDF more so. Even with good dust collection on your equipment, MDF is a dusty material. So good dust collection, a respirator as needed, make sure that you're running a filter in your shop, all that stuff. It's way better today than it used to be. The better part being, there used to be a lot of formaldehyde in these products. And today they've reduced that quite a bit. But you still want to protect yourself. So given the choice, I'm going to grab plywood for a project because I'm lazy and I don't want to carry heavy stuff. And it works for what I'm doing. Given the need, I'll go to MDF. I've got tabletops in here that are made completely out of MDF because it's nice and flat. It's inexpensive. So my gluing and finishing table, which is over there, you've seen it in videos, the top of that is MDF. And then I seal the heck out of it with linseed oil so glue and finish can't stick to it. So it's great for that kind of thing. The other product in that family, so this stuff is also in the particle board family, and I love this stuff. This was the first question was about melamine. That's what this is. So you can see that's particle board. That's also particle board. But in this case, it's been thermally fused on both faces with plastic. So what I love about this is that if I use melamine to build a cabinet, the cabinet interior is already done because it's finished with melamine. Again, in the awareness area of getting outside maybe your comfort zone of going to a home center, home centers will sell you white all day, every day. If you go to a hardwood supplier, you can get this in a bazillion different colors because manufacturers make this to match Formica products. We used to do a gas station that used, I think it was Formica 424 red, and we could buy melamine 424 red so that when we laminated one surface, it matched the melamine. So again, at a hardwood supplier, you'll be able to get melamine in a bunch of different colors and in different grains. You could get this with a faux maple, faux oak, faux walnut, so that if we're doing a walnut face frame, the interior of the cabinet is going to look similar to the solid wood that we're putting on the front. But again, that's not a home center thing. That's going to be a hardwood supplier thing. With melamine on the thickness component, it goes the other way. When melamine is made, they make 3/4 inch particle board first, then they fuse those plastic layers onto it. So it tends to be a little thicker than the other products. It's slightly over 3/4. Again, not a big deal as long as you're aware. So I love melamine also for shop jigs because it's slippery. So if I build an outfeed table out of this, stuff slides right across it. Or a fence for the table saw, any of that stuff. Works great for that. Let me search out questions for a minute, and then we have one more. I can't say enough about Max put that link in there for the wood guide. So grab that, and there's a lot of sheet stock information in there. There is the grading information is in there. That's really, really important. Jason asks, what's the best thing to use to seal MDF against moisture? Whatever your normal finish is. So if it paints like a dream. So if your project is paint it. If your normal finish is spraying spray lacquer. What sheet good do you think is best to create a workbench top and add dog holes? So it depends. These benches are, this one and its mate is right over there, are solid wood. They're ash. They've got 3/4 inch dog holes in them. That being said, I've done a couple of MFT things, multi-function table with 3/4 inch MDF. And that's pretty common. If you go buy Festool's MFT table, the top is MDF, and it's got either 19 millimeter or 20 millimeter dog holes in it that are compatible with their system. I can show you a thing, make some space. I just recently did this. I'll be right back. This project is a mini MFT. So the idea with this, if you look underneath, when I'm doing power carving or a lot of other things, I can put this, I've got a Triton workhorse, not sawhorse, but with a sliding jaw on it. Rigid makes one, a lot of companies make it. I can clamp this in the jaw of that horse, and then with this, and also holes in the vertical surface, I have 1,000 different ways to hold stuff. These are all Bessie products. So these clamps give me lateral pressure. These clamps give me vertical pressure. I can use that vertical face. If you're interested in this, we just shot this as a video this week, like yesterday. So watch for this to get released in the coming months. But MDF was a great choice for this because it stays flat. It's easy to work with. It's inexpensive. It easily takes, in this case, the 20 millimeter holes that these products require. So MDF is a great choice in that regard for all those reasons. Can you expand on painting MDF? So look at, basically the deal with MDF is that it goes through rollers, high heat, high pressure. And as a result, it's like extruded. And when it comes out, the faces are very smooth. A little bit of sanding, those are ready for paint. The edges are grainy. So look on WWGOA, there's a video clip about working with MDF, paint grade, and it goes down the road of what do we do to prime the edges prior to painting the project so that everything looks seamless when you're done. So on www.goa.com, use the search window, and probably a broad search like MDF or painting MDF will get you there. What's your go-to for mica type lamination, MDF? So I think what you're asking about is if I make a countertop, what do I use for the core of the countertop? That is probably the one time in my world I would use standard particle board. I have built more plastic laminate countertops than I care to remember with particle board as the core. Brian says, where would you use HDF? Never in my world. So MDF, medium density fiberboard, HDF, high density fiberboard. I don't know if I can buy it, where I can buy it. I don't know what its mojo is. The MDF I have used for decades and decades and decades. I've never come across anything. It's kind of funny that we call it MDF because it implies there's other stuff. Is there a low and a high? I guess there is, but I've never seen it anywhere. So I don't know. Wayne says, are the particle boards usually made from hardwood? I doubt it. I'm sure, it's like making Spam. It's just whatever's left over goes into a can of Spam. So I would say I do some research if you really want to know the answer for sure. But my guess would be whatever end products we have from production sawdust ends up mixed up and goes into particle board. So I would guess it could be nearly anything. A little bit north of me in Hayward, Wisconsin, there's a Louisiana Pacific plant. they make OSB, oriented strand board, for which they cut pulp wood. So when we go camping in the woods up there, and if there's a big clear cut, what happened is they came and they took out all the pulp wood, and they're probably at that LP plant in Hayward getting ground up and turned into strand board. And that pulp wood can basically be, almost anything but a hardwood. It's aspen and cottonwood and poplar and popole and all sorts of different stuff. John says, I have a bunch of veneering to do. Best wood for base, ? Plywood? No, I veneer over MDF pretty regularly. Always do 2 faces so it stays stable. There are a couple more questions. I'm going to get to them, but I don't want to forget about this last product. I'm going to do this first, and then I'll go back to questions again. So that last one, MDO, do not confuse it with MDF, medium density overlay. With this, we've got a face veneer here and a plywood core. That stuff is used a lot by sign makers because it can live outside. You could build a boat out of MDO. It is completely waterproof. With the coating on these faces, it feels like craft paper on there. It's not. This is a completely exterior product. With the coating on there, it paints like a dream. If you go and look at the camp kitchen project I made, so if you're a camper and you want to have a nice self-contained little thing for all your kitchen supplies when you're camping, look up the camp kitchen on WWGOA. That whole thing is made out of MDO for 2 reasons. It's light, it's in the plywood family. It's exterior, so even if I didn't paint the cabinet, which I did, it could live outside. And it handles very, very well. It's in the plywood family. So that entire project was made out of MDO, medium density overlay. So if you're doing something like that, it's going to live outside. You want it to be paint grade. I've CNC'd this stuff for exterior signs for all the same reasons. It cuts really with CNCs very, very well. So that's our last one, medium density overlay. Okay, I didn't want to forget that. Okay, veneer. We talked about that. I would use MDF for that. Gregory says, are you primarily gluing when using MDF? Glue and screws. And then he follows up, or mechanical fasteners, or both. Is there no end grain issue when using MDF? So end grain in that, like I mentioned, if you're going to paint it, you want to find that video about the steps to prime the edges before you paint. If you're going to run screws into MDF or anything in the particle board family, there are particle board specific screws. Bottom line, they have a little bit deeper thread to them. They get a better bite in MDF products than a standard wood screw will. So if you're going to count on fasteners in anything in the particle board family, get those specific fasteners. And William says, do hardwood suppliers sell retail? Maybe yes, maybe no. You got to call them and ask. So it's a potential downside to finding a hardwood supplier is maybe they only do business to business. But a number of places in this area will do both. So their pricing might be different. If I call, I'm ordering a couple hundred board feet of material at a time. I'm ordering 20 sheets at a time. So maybe on a volume basis, you might pay a little bit different price. But Google them, find them. Don't just drive up, make the phone call, ask if they will sell to consumers. And then if yes, then figure out what you got to do to go in that direction. So the nut out of all of this, the takeaway out of all this is picking the right tools for the job, picking the right glue for the job, picking the right fasteners for the job, picking the right sheet stock for the job. Sheet stock in general, less expensive than solid wood, more stable than solid wood, easier to handle because I don't have to glue it up to make big panels. Within the category of sheet goods, there's a bunch of different stuff that we talked about. So have a look at that and keep all of this in mind. Get that guide about the hardwood guide, which also has sheet stock information in it. Also, grab those Adirondack chair plans. It's only March. You still got plenty of time to make 2 or 4 or 12 Adirondack chairs before summer comes. And again, one of the cool things about that plan is that I provided full-size templates. So it's very turnkey. You take that PDF to a Kinko's or someplace, have them printed out full size, and you'll have all of those curvy shapes. You don't have to generate them by drawing from graph paper. Dennis says, where does masonite fit in? Yeah, that's a good question. Hardboard. So hardboard is the thickest I've ever seen is 1/4 inch. So pegboard is made out of hardboard. Like right there is pegboard on my wall. So in the hardboard family, you can get non-tempered and tempered. I generally buy tempered. It's harder, as the name implies. And it's, as a result, a little bit easier to work with. It has better attributes. For me, I might use it for a drawer bottom, a cabinet back, something like that. Again, limited to 1/4 inch, but it's very inexpensive. So if you're making shop cabinets and you want to practice your Copen style joinery and make a flat panel door, a pretty cool aesthetic would be get that number 2 pine from a home center, use that to make the door frame, and then for your panel, put in that chocolate brown tempered masonite. That would look pretty cool inside the pine. And masonite stays very, very flat. You can get it, it's not called surface 2 faces. I'm not remembering what it's called, but where one face is pebbly and one face is flat, or where both faces are flat. In my world, clearly I don't use it daily, so I'm talking off the top of my head a little, but whenever possible, I buy smooth 2 faces, and then that just gives me more options when I work with it. Mark says, painting MDF, water-based finish versus oil-based, either one will work. I've done them both. Jason says, have you ever used the OSB as a core for veneering? I have not. I don't think you could. I don't think OSB is anywhere near flat enough. So the beauty of, did I say that right? I don't think OSB is flat enough. My brain might have said MDF because that's where I'm going next. The beauty of MDF is the face is so flat, there's nothing there to telegraph through. Unlike a veneered plywood or an OSB, where with those products, your veneer is going to show whatever grain is in the OSB or the plywood. Tim says, what do you use for router templates? Yes, I don't know. Acrylic when I can, polycarbonate. Baltic birch is a great choice for that. Hardened tempered masonite works okay. If you're going to create a template, you're going to use once, MDF is okay. MDF can be a little soft. So if you're going to run a router bit against it a bazillion times, then I would rather see that made out of Baltic birch or plexiglass because it'll hold up against that bearing for a much longer period. Mark says, do you ever use whiteboard for drawer bottoms? Whiteboard. I'm not familiar with what whiteboard is. My drawer bottoms are very commonly 1/4 inch something. 1/4 inch masonite, 1/4 inch. If it's an oak cabinet and I'm buying 1/4 inch for the back, I'm probably putting 1/4 inch drawer bottoms in oak veneer. So Baltic birch drawer boxes with oak bottoms. If you want everything to match all around, you could do 1/4 inch birch in the bottoms. So that would work. All right. Well, that was good. We had a long live today with a lot of good questions. This is, where are we? End of March. So a couple things to watch for. The spot for it is already created. In April, we're doing a Mother's Day specific cutting board live stream. So watch for that in your email. It's a really cool technique that adds a really nice detail, not just to cutting boards, but to anything that you're making, geared toward Mother's Day because of the theme of the thing that we're doing with the cutting board. Don't forget Mother's Day is in May. So you want to start working on that gift soon. And then when we get to May, the Thursday live Q&A, so that's the 4 o'clock event, I'm going to have a guest for that. Ryan is going to be with me. We are going to talk about monetizing your woodworking shop. Ryan is a genius at this stuff. He has built a business that is incredible, and he's got lots and lots of ideas, and a lot of, not just ideas, but his own experience, very valuable, of how he built his business up to where it is today. Young guy with a lot of employees, doing really well, monetizing woodworking to make a living from it. So that's going to be our session at that Thursday 4 o'clock live stream. So watch for that one too. Other than that, if you are a WWGOA Gold member, I will see you back here at 1 o'clock for your live stream. Otherwise, I will see the rest of you, I don't know when, because I don't have a calendar in front of me, and I'm bad at talking off the top of my head about dates and where I'm supposed to be next. So I will see you next time. Max, you can check us out.